Good morning, y'all. We are back with another edition of DNVR Rams Live. As always, I am your host, Justin Michael. Been a busy week, obviously. Just got through the move. First live show from the new house. Obviously don't have the studio quite set up yet, but hoping to have that at least partially up for tomorrow's show. Feels kind of weird being in the all-white room here. We've got a lot to get over on today's show, or to go over, I should say. We're going to talk about the latest recruiting news for CSU football. We're going to talk about Gabe Jones, the defensive line commit that CSU picked up yesterday. I'm going to talk about the lawsuit that Colorado State and Utah State filed against the Mountain West. Boise State has since joined that suit. Would not surprise me if in the end Fresno and San Diego State ended up joining that lawsuit as well. I'm going to give my perspective on it. I joked on Twitter that I didn't know there were so many legal experts, and honestly that was more a jab at the media members that are staying or that are covering the teams that are staying in the Mountain West. There were just a lot of snarky comments about it, but basically like, you signed a contract, so that's the end of it. And if that were the case, I think lawyers would have a lot less billable hours, a lot less to do. We'll get into all of that. I certainly don't claim to be a legal expert, but based on some of the things I've heard from folks that are smarter to me in these subjects, I think CSU and Utah State and the departing schools for the Pac-12 have a pretty decent chance of coming out to either a settlement that is favorable for them, or potentially even getting some of those poaching fees thrown out altogether. We'll talk about that. I'll talk about UNLV spending big money on Dan Mullen, trying to keep up this success that they've had in recent years. I think their appeal right now is a little bit overblown, but I do think they're a sleeping giant, particularly if the people involved with the casinos decide that they just really want UNLV to be a factor in this modern college football landscape. Things could get interesting because they obviously have the money to blow out there. We'll talk about that. I'll talk about Jake Dickert leaving Washington State for Wake Forest. Admittedly, the way he handled that kind of hurts my argument when I rail against the transfer portal process and a lack of loyalty. When a coach dips in the middle of the night like that, doesn't even have a meeting with his team to say goodbye, that really hurts my cause. That really hurts my argument. And I understand that. I think that's one of the main reasons why a lot of people are so pro-player movement in this modern era, is that a lot of coaches will ultimately do what is best for them. And the players should probably have the right to do that as well. I'll talk about it at the end here. In the intro, I just wanted to send some love out to Mitchell Carroll. Obviously, there was a lot of stuff going on within ALLCITY. It was big news, which is always a weird process. These are our colleagues and coworkers and friends, and it's a news story that we're having layoffs. I received a lot of really kind messages from CSU fans checking in on me, which I appreciate. But I just wanted to send my love out to Mitchell, who is a really talented creator, did an incredible job building up that Rapids beat. And I'm really going to miss him. So I just wanted to send some love his way, and to all of the folks impacted within ALLCITY this week. Really, really tough. But yeah, just wanted to say a shout out to him and a shout out to all of you for your support. It means a lot to me. I'll be going live tomorrow as well, so make sure you're tuned in. We'll talk a little bit more about basketball, coming off of a double-digit win over Radford to conclude the non-conference slate. They will start the Mountain West portion of the schedule on Saturday against Nevada. Unfortunately, kind of right in the middle of the college football playoff games, but a big opportunity out on the road for CSU against a really good team. That's going to be a tough matchup for the Rams. Let's just get right into it and talk about the recruiting news. If you're listening on YouTube, good morning to you. If you're listening audio only later on, shout out to you guys as well. All these shows are always going to be available on all the different platforms, Spotify, Apple. If you wouldn't mind subscribing, giving me a 5 stars. If you're a fan of what I do, show the world. It certainly would help my cause. But I'm going to start here by talking about New Mexico State transfer defensive tackle Gabe Jones, committed to CSU last night. Not the biggest defensive tackle in the world, 6'4", 285, but to me it looks like he's still kind of growing into his frame there. He's got good length. He's a good athlete. He moves well, especially when you go back and you look at some of his recruiting stuff coming out of high school. Reportedly picked New Mexico State over an offer from Oklahoma State as well as Louisiana Monroe. So he did have some significant interest coming out of high school. He was the District 6 5A Defensive Player of the Year as a senior, 64 tackles and 8 sacks his senior year at W.T. White High School, which is out in Dallas. I like that they were able to add a highly athletic guy with a good frame who still has years to develop. He'll come over with 3 years of eligibility remaining after playing a little bit as a redshirt freshman, 16 tackles in 2024. Also had 1 tackle for loss and half a sack. Did not post in terms of any of the offers he received the second time around in his recruitment process. But I have to imagine that his relationship with Chuka Ndulule, the defensive line coach at CSU, who was the D-line coach at New Mexico State back when Jones signed out of high school and during his freshman year, I would assume that relationship played a big role in the Rams being able to bring him in. As far as the position goes, if you remember back to last week when we played some clips from Jay Norvell talking about signing day, defensive tackle, definitely one of the most pressing needs for the Rams. They're losing 4 interior defensive linemen after this bowl game, not to the portal, just to graduation and to the end of their eligibility. The most pressing, you're losing Cam Baratow and James Mitchell. Those are your top 2 interior guys. You're also losing Will Prendergast, who has kind of come on strong as the season has come on here. I wish that they could have had another year with him. I think he would have kind of really flourished in year 2, but that's kind of how the portal goes, unfortunately. Sometimes it takes guys a little bit of time to find their footing in a new system. He certainly was a much needed depth addition for the team. I was hoping to get a little bit more out of him early on in the season, but he has, proven to be big, and they'll need him in that bowl game for sure. But they're losing him. They're losing one of the other transfer defensive tackles that came over from Washington State. I'm drawing a blank on his name right now. Did not play a ton, but you're losing 4 veterans there, so it's certainly a position of need for you. I still have my eyes on Grady Kelly, the former CSU and now former Florida State defensive tackle, who's back in the portal. If you could bring him back to Fort Collins, that would just be such a nice haul for this defense. You're losing a ton of experience, both in the trenches and in the secondary. So just being able to add some guys with experience is going to be crucial. That said, you also need guys like Jones to both bolster the depth and give you an opportunity to develop around. You don't always want to be plug and play with some of these key positions where you're having to go back to the portal year after year. Norvell talked about that. It is going to be a heavier portal cycle than it has been these last 2. I expect 10 plus transfer additions between the winter and the spring, maybe as much as like 15, depending on if they could get hot there. But like with defensive line and corner, you've got to be able to sign some guys, even if it's not necessarily directly out of high school. If you can get a guy that is only a year or 2 into his college career, you've got to get some players around here that can stick around and potentially play multiple seasons for you, because it's just really challenging and frankly a burden to have to go year after year and try and build and try and rebuild, your entire defense there. It's just a tough spot to be in. They've been fortunate that they've been able to hang on to the safeties, but I mean, like corner and defensive line, especially, it's kind of been a revolving door for the Rams the last couple of years. You've got to be able to lock some of these guys down, hang on to them, develop them, and hopefully send them off to the NFL. Not a ton of experience to go off of now. I can't say I've watched a lot of New Mexico State football over the last year. I will certainly go back through this winter and try and watch as much film on Jones as I possibly can. But what stands out to me from what I have seen from him, he moves really well. He's got that lanky frame that looks like he can still put on some weight there. Not 285, but I think he can get up closer to 300. He does look like he's maybe going to play sub 300, just kind of based on his style. Like I don't think you want to lose that quickness. I think that's a lot of what benefits him. But he does look strong, and like I said, more than anything, you just need guys to put in the trenches there because you're losing a lot of key contributors. And you like that you have a previously established relationship because recruiting in the portal can be kind of a crapshoot. It's not just about watching a guy on film and seeing if they're going to translate athletically. You also got to know, what are they going to be like inside that locker room? How are they going to translate from that standpoint? What are they going to do to your team culture? You know, what kind of teammate are they going to be? What kind of effort are they going to put forth? And when you're able to sign a transfer that you previously recruited in high school, you just have a lot wider range of information to go off of. You've known them for multiple years. You've been in their house. You've talked to their families. You know their goals, their aspirations, and all that. And I just think that relationship with Chuka was probably very much part of what made him appealing to CSU. On top of, like I said, in an athletic background and a guy that I think if he can put on some weight here, could be a productive defensive lineman for you in the interior. Even with the addition of Jones, I still feel like defensive tackle is a big position of need. Hoping to get Jones on the show at some point to talk about what appeals to him about CSU. We've reached out to Rocky Beers, have not heard back yet, but we're going to try and get all of these transfer additions, at least as many as we can, on the show at one point or another this winter. Usually during winter break and stuff, these guys will have some downtime, and I will be able to kind of get their perspective, which I always enjoy. And obviously, I'll ask him about a lot of the stuff that we have been diving into. Moving forward here, some more positions of need before we start talking about that lawsuit against the Mountain West. I would say the number one need as of now is probably a tie between offensive line and corner. I think you're going to have to get at least two of your starting offensive linemen via the portal, if not potentially three. They are excited about some of these young guys. It's just always kind of a precarious position to be in when you are that dependent on that many young individuals. If you could go out and get, your starting offensive tackle, and maybe they have it. I mean, maybe it's MJ Senegal, the 6'5", 290-pound offensive tackle that they brought over from Feather River College. You certainly love his frame. And CSU has had pretty good success these last couple of years, pulling guys up from those lower ranks, whether it be Savion Henderson or Drew Moss. Both of those guys played at a lower level, but before coming up and being multi-year starters for CSU. But you definitely need to improve the depth of the line there. Tight end, I think they could use another guy as well. You are excited about Jackson Warren. Coming off an injury, he's probably in line to be the number one tight end. And like I said, defensive tackle, defensive end, still position you need. Corner, I could see them going after another linebacker, but I do like the young guys that they have in the program, especially if Chase Wilson comes back for one last run. But yeah, big time transfer addition, and I expect really these next 10 days or so for it to kind of heat up and for CSU to start adding a couple of more guys now is when those players are on campus and they're making their decisions, and it's a process. Have some patience. That's all I'm preaching here. Again, shout out to everybody in the Toyota chat. Much love, especially to my guy, RG. I got a big Broncos game tonight, rocking the classic Shannon Sharp. You always got to go classic for the division games, in my opinion. I've got an OA. I've got a Terrell Davis. I put Von Miller in that category. When it's a big division game, you got to go for it. All right, we're going to move on. We're going to talk about the lawsuit against the Mountain West. I'm going to give some thoughts on that. I think there's some posturing going on from both sides here. Don't claim to be a legal expert, won't ever be one. But based on what I've heard, based on what I've read, I'll give you guys as much information as I can on kind of what the goal is here from these departing schools, why they might actually have a better case than you would think, and ultimately where I expect this to land, which is some type of settlement. Real quick, though, between work, between life, between everything that gets thrown our way, it can be chaotic. And our friends at Coors Light encourage you to choose a chill mindset. You got to rise above the chaos and choose that chill state of mind. Once you do, once you're kicked back, once you're chilling, crack open an ice cold Coors Light. Coors Light is cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged for that smooth finish. Call it a triple threat. When the mountains turn blue, it's as cold as the Rockies. When you embrace a chill mindset, it's a good time to choose chill and crack open a Coors Light. Make the most out of the times you choose to chill. Choose Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door with Instacart by going to CoorsLight.com/DNVR. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. I also want to talk to you guys about Game Time. The holiday season is among us. It's all about togetherness, being with your loved ones, with the people that you care about. If you are a diehard sports fan, and if you're listening to this show, I assume you are. One of my favorite parts of winter is being able to hang out with the people I love and take in all of the sports scene going down right now. You've got college football playoff games this weekend. You've got the beginning of conference play for CSU Hoops, but you've got the NFL, you've got the NBA, you've got the NHL. There's so much going down right now. And our friends at Game Time are making it easier than ever to get the best deals possible on all your favorite live events. On top of sports, they've got comedy, they've got theater, you name it, they've got it. And with their Game Time Picks feature, which is an awesome little curation function that they've added in, it's easier than ever to see the best deals that they've got. They're all in pricing, makes the process smooth. You're not going to get hit with 8 million fees at the end. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, redeem that code DNVR for $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, create an account, redeem that code DNVR for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, John in the Toyota chat says, how's the team feeling going into the bowl game? Are they hungry for a win? Yeah, that's the impression that I get talking to, some of the people behind the scenes. They're always publicly, like, on record, going to say the right stuff. You want to win this game, but this is a situation where you've really got to monitor the vibes and the body language. I will always remember back to 2017 being out in Albuquerque in the days leading up to the New Mexico Bowl. And it was just so clear how much more Marshall wanted to be there than the Rams. Like, you could just feel it. And they went out and they kicked CSU's ass because the Rams gave a half-ass performance out there. I don't expect that. You've got a lot of key veterans that have been essentially building towards this for their entire career. Henry Blackburn, Jack Howell, Chase Wilson, these guys have quite literally put their blood, sweat, and tears into the program. And I just don't see a world in which they would just lay down here at the end and not care about this game. I think it matters to them and their legacy and going out the right way. And I think they're excited. They've been desperate to go to a bowl game for years now. I understand that the bowl season doesn't quite mean what it used to, but this game, it means something to CSU this year. And I don't know if that would necessarily be the case every year. Like 3 years from now, you're still in that mid-tier bowl range. It probably loses some of its luster, and I understand that. But right now, given where this program was at, given what these players have been through, I expect a hungry Rams team out in Tucson, and ultimately it would be awesome to get the first bowl win since 2013. Been far too long. Ryan wants to know, has Miami lost any significant players to the portal? They've lost a couple of receivers. I think their number 2 wide receiver and like their number 4 wide receiver. A lot of their most significant contributors, and I mentioned this in my initial reaction to them drawing Miami of Ohio, was that, like CSU, you have a lot of 5th and 6th year guys in some of these key spots. Their quarterback and their running back, both 6-year guys. They've got a linebacker that's in his 6th and maybe even 7th season. Has like over 500 tackles in his career. These are guys that can't portal. And for a lot of these guys, especially in the MAC, this is going to be the last game that they ever play. So really, I expect a pretty intense effort from both sides. I think this is a game that both squads want pretty badly. John says, sounded like past teams who went to a bowl were not into it, didn't seem to care. I hope this is not true for the team. Spot on. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm getting to. I think some of those teams in the Bobo era maybe thought, and they honestly probably should have accomplished more. I don't think that their opinion that team should have done more is incorrect. It was always just a bit frustrating to me to have that type of ego, given the fact that they constantly came up short. I mean, there are a lot of things that went wrong at the end of the Bobo era, but not having total buy-in in that locker room was one of the biggest issues that kind of prevented them from never quite reaching the ceiling, because there was certainly a lot of talent, a lot of really good dudes, especially on offense and at the skill positions, that came through the program during that time. Some defensive studs as well. You know, like the Mo Camaras and Toby McBrides of the world. You know, they don't grow on trees. All right, let's get into this lawsuit, which this news broke about 48 hours ago. I first saw it from Ross Dellinger of Yahoo, but I know multiple national outlets were on it. I'm sure they all got the same group text from the lawyers or ADs or whoever reaches out to them. But I found it interesting, the reaction that this lawsuit has drawn. I'm not surprised that there's snarky comments, in particular from Mountain West fans from schools like Nevada, Wyoming, because they're already frustrated. This whole process is not what's best for them. A true merger would have been best for some of the schools that are getting left behind, and they're frustrated, and I understand that, and they should be. Some of the comments from the media surrounding those schools, in my opinion, have been disingenuous and dorky. I'm not going to call out anybody in particular, because I'm not trying to start beefs, but I would just say that anybody that didn't anticipate this ending up in court one way or another, you're pretty oblivious. Like, you got your head in the sand there. Lawyers make a lot of money for a reason. And while I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm some legal expert that, you know, that can break down all the nuances of contract law or anything like that, like, that's not what I'm qualified to sit here and do. But I do find myself to be at least somewhat intelligent, not a total dumbass, I would say. So, you know, I've done some research these last couple of days. I wanted to try and get as much context as I possibly could before I came on here and started spouting a bunch of stuff ignorantly. Again, I'm not a legal expert. A lot of this I'm going off of is based on what has been told to me by people that are smarter to me in these fields. But quickly summarizing the situation, if you remember back when there was the Pac-12 Mountain West scheduling agreement, Gloria Nevarez put some stipulations in place that stated if the Pac-2 were to poach members of the Mountain West Conference in hopes of rebuilding the Pac-12, that they would have to pay an escalating series of poaching fees for each school that would, you know, amount to hundreds of millions of dollars if you took a significant portion of the conference. That's on top of, you know, the already in place exit fees that you would have standard, you know, with leaving a conference. And in as like simple of a way as possible, the Mountain West is arguing that's not legal, that's not enforceable. We have the standard buyout fees that, you know, are in the best interest of the conference to protect themselves from moves like this, but to then add, you know, these poaching penalties on top of that, that's unenforceable for a variety of reasons. It comes down to like anti-competition and stuff like that. Some of the same arguments you've seen in place for, you know, the players and movement and stuff like that. Like, you can't excessively penalize these schools in a way that doesn't essentially equate to fair compensation for these schools leaving. They're saying you're charging us these exorbitant, I can't even say that word. They're charging these massive fees, and it's double dipping. It's basically what the Mountain West is arguing. They're saying you have no grounds there. That's never been done before. And on top of that, you know, schools like CSU, Utah State, they're alleging that although they have publicly even stated that they are going to leave, they haven't formally filed the paperwork with the Mountain West to leave. You know, they haven't formally filed their notification of exit, which means that as of today, you're still a full standing member of the conference. You're still voting, or at least you should be. It sounds like there's some alleged collusion going on there. You know, the departing school is claiming that the Mountain West, especially Gloria Nevarez, you know, doing some stuff behind the scenes with the schools, which honestly, that makes sense. Like, they're trying to rebuild the conference. But like I said, this was always going to end up in court. I would assume that in the end, they come to some type of settlement, because I don't think the departing Pac-12 schools are just going to get out scot-free. There's precedent there, and you're probably going to have to pay those established buyout fees, and you probably should have to. I do wonder, and I've seen a lot of people, again, much smarter than me, claim that the Mountain West might be screwed if this thing actually goes to trial, though. And that's why I ultimately anticipate some type of settlement in the end, probably more than the original, buyout there, but also probably not the potential 150 to 250 million dollars that could be going to the Mountain West if these Pac-12 schools were to lose. I understand both sides. It's really a situation where if you're the Mountain West, you're going to do everything that you can to get every possible penny out of these departing Pac-12 schools, and they should. They're looking out for what is best for them. They're not just going to roll over. There's some optics involved in this. Like there's some PR moves. A lot of this is chess, but if you're the Pac-12, you're going to go in and you're going to do whatever you can to get that payment reduced, because you've still got to fill out the remainder of the conference. Even if you save, like, let's say you pay part of it, but if you can find a way to come to a settlement and you save like $100 million, that's $100 million. You then have to go add Memphis and Tulane or whoever else, that you want to bring over to the Pac-12. I don't think it's a situation where the Pac-12 is just going to get out of this scot-free. I also don't anticipate them having to pay this full ransom, essentially, is what it has become. I understand that it's complicated. I understand that there's going to be feelings involved on both sides, but just kind of looking at it from an objective standpoint, it seems like posturing. And in the end, that very likely leads with some type of negotiated settlement. I think it probably happens at some point this spring, although who knows, like this stuff can certainly get drawn out. And if you're the Mountain West, outside of having to pay the legal fees, and that could be a factor for them, we'll draw it out. Like we have full membership at this point. You guys still need it. So it would behoove you guys more than us to get this settled immediately, outside of, spending money in court. But it's going to be really interesting to see how all of this plays out, because basically, like, the Mountain West promised all this money to UNLV and Air Force, and if that money never ends up coming to the Mountain West, is that agreement then null and void at that point to retain them? Like, could UNLV still be in play for the Pac-12? Could Air Force at that point say, all right, well, then we're going to go to the American. We'll be with Navy and Army, be in the same league as them. Like, the Mountain West really needs this money. That their TV contract is not going to be killer. I think it'll be fine. I think it'll probably be basically on par with what the Mountain West is getting now, where if they would have kept the guys, they would have been in line for a little bit of an increase, but you lose the top half of your league in value. I still think you basically get the same amount of money in the end, just because these TV contracts are absurd and they just seem to keep going up and up and up. Just probably aren't going to see any more given who they lost. I hope that made sense. That was a lot of information that I just threw your way and tried to kind of give you the Cliff Notes version of this. Again, I don't claim to be a legal expert, but my summary here is that the Pac-12 likely won't have to pay all of those fees. They will pay some of them in the end. They'll come out to settlements, and then the Pac-12 will use the money they save to further their expansion, and we'll all move on. That'll be the end of it. But anybody acting like this wasn't always going to end up in court have not been paying attention to basically the way the world works, not just college sports. Like, talk about a great gig if you can be an attorney for an athletic department or something like that. Like, the billable hours have just got to be absurd. I picked the wrong field. I don't think I probably would have been smart enough to graduate from law school in the first place. But I am interested to see how all of this plays out, because I do think there's still some interest there from the Pac-12 in adding UNLV. I think UNLV's value right now gets overblown. You look at their TV viewership metrics, it's increased the last couple of years, but you're still in the hundreds, and that's because the locals really don't care about UNLV football, at least historically. You keep winning like this, that'll change. They keep spending the big money to bring in, the Dan Mullens of the world. That could change. But I don't know. Like, you don't need UNLV to have access to Vegas. You could host your conference tournament there. you could host your conference title game for football there, whether you have UNLV or not. I think given the growth of the Vegas sports market, it makes sense, and they probably have more value long term than a lot of these other potential schools that you could add to the Pac-12. I also think some of that gets overblown though, just because Vegas is great, and again, you don't necessarily need UNLV to get into Vegas. Take a quick break here. We're going to talk about UNLV hiring Dan Mullen, talk about some of the potential impact. I really just wonder what happens if the Mountain West cannot deliver the money that it promised to UNLV and Air Force, and what that could potentially mean for the Mountain West or for the Pac-12. I mean, the whole thing could kind of fall apart for the Mountain West at that point. You've already been crippled by this process in terms of the brands that you've lost. If you then go lose the two teams that you determined were going to be your new pillars of the conference, that's really, really rough. That's why I expect like the Mountain West isn't just going to lay down because they need that money. They've made some pretty bold promises here with some pretty big checks that they're going to have to cash at one point or another. But UNLV, like if they can sustain what they've built here with Odom, and they're going to lose some guys to the portal, that's just part of the process. But you're bringing in Dan Mullen as your head coach, highest paid coach in Mountain West history. You're also going to bring over Zach Arnett, who's a highly touted defensive coordinator, has a ton of experience in SEC. Like, they're big game hunting at the moment. Can you sustain it though? Like right now, things are good. If UNLV doesn't get that money that was promised their way from the Mountain West, like they'll be on the phone with the Pac-12 yesterday, trying to negotiate a way to come over. And if you ultimately, like if this agreement with UNLV and Air Force falls through, and you can get Air Force to go to the American, UNLV ends up going to the Pac-12, like you're getting pretty close at that point to just being able to dissolve the conference. And at that point, maybe you do just get out of it with no fees. I just think there's a lot of moves that have still yet to happen in this whole thing. And I think we kind of oversimplify it, looking at it one step at a time, when in reality, I think these lawyers are like, we're making this move for the ultimate move, which is going to come after, 3 other small things happen in between. That's why they get paid a lot more money than we do. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on the Mountain West, this whole lawsuit situation. A lot of posturing going on both sides. I think there's some validity to both sides of the argument. But ultimately, I would be surprised, based on what I'm hearing from those in the know, if the Pac-12 had to pay those poaching fees in their entirety, because I just don't think there's a precedent there. I don't think it's enforceable. We'll see. Just because you sign something doesn't necessarily mean that it is legal or will be, enforced in the end. So we'll see what happens there. I wanted to give a couple of thoughts just on Jake Dickert leaving Washington State for Wake Forest. First of all, that could potentially make that 2024 game a lot more manageable for the Rams. You've kind of gotten thumped the last 2 times you've played Washington State. They've been hit by the portal hard. I think it was like 23 guys the last time I saw. All their skill guys, their quarterback Mateer is Oklahoma bound with the OC. Tough break. Washington State has been stabbed in the back, shanked by the evolution of college football and conference realignment and all this, probably more than anybody. They're in a really weird spot now. Like, do you go economical and try and bring a rising FCS coach over, like a Jason Eck, who just accepted the New Mexico gig, so maybe not him. Although I don't know if a UNM buyout is going to be enough to deter Washington State if they really have their heart set on him. What I wanted to add, though, was while I kind of get it, like Washington State is in no man's land to an extent. They've been in a really tough spot, and I think Dickert has fielded some competitive teams despite some really weird circumstances working against him. I get jumping to the ACC. There's more stability there, although I think you can make an argument that Wake Forest on the football side is a really hard gig as well, but at least you have stability from a TV contract and all that. And also I think there's some timing involved there. Like, I'm going to jump now well, my stock is still high enough to be able to do so before I put myself in a position where I commit to this program, which probably has already peaked. Like, to me, it seems like the ship was starting to sink. He could feel that, and he just decided to jump off now instead of waiting it out until it, ultimately was completely submerged and you lose all these players to the portal and you figure out that like the best is already behind you. I'm going to go out while I still have the opportunity to do so. I get all of that. But when coaches do stuff like this, when they leave their players in the dark, they accept an opportunity and all the power to them. But when they do stuff like this, it really makes it hard to argue against the player having total freedom of movement. And I think as a whole, this chaos that we are having happen right now, it's bad for college football. It's bad for interest in the game. It's bad for far more schools than it's good for. That said, when coaches do stuff like this, like, you understand why a lot of people are like, well, the players should have that option, because there's no loyalty the other way. And I just think it's such a chicken shit way to go. Not even to have a team meeting. I get you got to hit the ground running, but I mean, we're through the early period at this point. He could have stayed 24 hours longer, went out the right way, had a meeting with his team, looked them in the face and told him he was leaving. And instead, they found out on Twitter. And you've seen the reaction from the Washington State players has been pretty intense. Kyle Williams was cursing him out in some Instagram comments, a really talented receiver that went to Washington State out of UNLV. He was a CSU target, actually, a guy that would have looked really good next to Torrey Horton. But I have a hard time arguing with the people that say, just from a standpoint of what's right and wrong, the coaches shouldn't have total freedom of movement and the player, or I guess I should say the players should not be restricted with their movement if the coaches have total freedom of movement, and they always have. And just about at least once a year, somebody does something like this that completely takes the weight out of, the arguments from people like me who are frustrated by the current state of college football, who just want to enjoy the game that they love, but also understand that for years and years and years, the players had zero leverage, zero power in this process. I still think we need some type of regulation and standards. I still think having the portal take place in the middle of your postseason is ridiculous. No other sport would do that, and they wouldn't, because it's a freaking ludicrous way to do things. I also understand that the academic calendar is a factor, and these guys have got to be able to get into school. They've got to change something. But when coaches do stuff like this, when they act just completely in their own interest, it adds all the fuel to the fire for those who have been preaching that this is why the players need the right to be able to do this, because the coaches can do it to the players. So why can't the players do it to the coaches? And I don't know if I have anything that's a logical retort against that, just being completely real with you guys. Like, I still fully believe that this is bad for college football as a whole, but I don't know, maybe you have to figure it out. Maybe you've just got to figure out a way to make the best of what I feel like is a really crappy system for the competitive product, for the general interest from the vast majority of fan bases who basically watch their programs serve as minor league teams for a small portion of schools that can just stockpile resources at the top. But that's kind of always been the case too. There's just a lot more movement involved in the process these days. But yeah, before we get out of here, if you have any questions, comments, fire them off in the Toyota chat. I appreciate everybody that's been rocking with us this morning. Like I said, we will be going live again tomorrow morning at 10. Tyler wants to know, with Jock and Goody transferring, do you think we have enough depth to fill those voids? I do. Wide receivers, you can add. Like, you can go find a guy that can produce for you, and I think, walk on Tommy Maher or even like Dane Olson are great examples of that. Sure, you want that top end talent. You want the Torrey Hortons of the world, the 4- and 5-star athletes with explosive traits that are going to translate at the NFL. Like, if you can get those guys, you certainly want them, but you can find receivers that can fill in holes for you in depth. I'm not super worried about that, especially with Chad Savage and Jay Norvell. They've got a great history of being able to land talent there. The track record kind of speaks for itself. Losing Boom Jock hurts. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. One of your leading tacklers, and I think would have been your top defensive player next year. I'm not going to act like that's just nothing and that you're not going to feel that. But it does sound like Chase Wilson will be back, so you will have that veteran presence still. And you've got some young guys coming up, Drew Rodriguez in particular, as well as Owen Long, a true freshman that has just really flashed. That I think you feel pretty good there. Like, yeah, if you could add a Byron Parham or something like that, a former San Jose State star linebacker who transferred to Washington and then had injuries slow him down. Like, yeah, if you can bring a guy in like that who's proven in this league, you got to do it just from a depth standpoint. But I do think linebacker especially is a position where you feel pretty good about the up-and-coming talent that you have in the program. And you're bringing in some guys that you're excited about as well. I mean, Cannon Valenzuela is one of the recruits I'm really high on this current cycle. Wide receiver safety that they'll convert to linebacker, very much like Boom Jock. That's just what they're going to do. They want guys that are rangier, that can move well. But I'm not panicking about those as of now. Sure, you want the depth, but more than anything, if I had to say, like, what is the position group that I'm most concerned with the depth at this moment as of 10:45 in the morning on December 19th, it'd be defensive tackle and it would be corner. And that's just because the amount of experience you're losing at both of those positions. I mean, basically the entire two deep, hanging on to Andrew Lorich in the interior and then Dylan Phelps at corner. That's really big. Those are both young players that have flashed a ton this year and I think have really high ceilings. The type of guys you lost last year that really stung. So that's big, but they definitely have some holes defensively where they're going to need to add some depth. Ryan says, what do you think about TJ Crandall possibly coming back? You'd absolutely take him back if he'd be willing to. I know he was on Oregon State's campus this week. Oregon State's got some money to play with, so they're kind of tough to recruit against at the moment. He is a Pacific Northwest kid. I could see him wanting to potentially be closer to family. But yeah, I mean, if you were able to bring him in, great athlete, flash for you as a true freshman. You already have some familiarity there. Like, I would take any of those top guys that transferred out last year and left. I mean, if you can bring Crandall back, Grady Kelly would be my top target. Lewis Brown, like, yeah, I'd be open to any of those guys returning. Van Shield, even. Like, you can never have enough depth in key veterans that have already played for you. Like, I don't know if those are the guys that make the difference between like being the top team in the league or something like that. But it makes you feel a whole lot better about the general experience level going into next season, because you're going to be pretty young on both sides of the ball, I think, in some key spots in the trenches and, you know, potentially in the secondary and stuff as well. It is big that you likely bring your quarterback back and all of that. I anticipate Braden Fowler-Nicolosi will be a starting quarterback next season. You can build around him. I mean, anytime you can have a 3-year starter at the collegiate level, that's not nothing. It's really going to benefit you. I've talked a lot about his arm talent. But yeah, that's where we're at for this morning. Shout out to everybody that continues to support the content. If you want to continue to have this CSU coverage, if you love what I'm doing, you know, spread the word. Send it to your friends. Send it to your family. Show grandma on Christmas. You know, you're sitting around the Christmas tree. Show her DNVR Rams live. We'll be going live on the 26th, the day after Christmas. So, you know, when you're feeling bloated from, you know, all the eggnog, maybe you had a couple of Coors Lights the night before, you can lock in on the morning of the 26th. I'll set the scene for the trip out to Tucson. I'm really looking forward to that bowl game. I'd love to see as many of you as possible. I'd love to meet some of you guys in person. I'm constantly humbled and overwhelmed by the support that the CSU Rams community gives me. You guys mean the world to me. Happy holidays, y'all. Much love. We are always proud to be. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.